Oh hey, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Joe the Blue Wizard, and in today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you another one of my grandmother Zophia's recipes. Now this recipe comes highly requested, particularly from one of my family members, my cousin Eric. So Eric, this one is for you. The recipe that I'm going to be sharing with you is my grandmother's recipe for gołąbki. For those of you who aren't familiar with Polish cuisine, gołąbki is our version of a cabbage roll. It's basically a piece of cabbage, and in it is stuffed a delicious meat filling. Now, fair warning, this recipe is a little bit of a labor of love, but I promise you that the results are well worth the work. And I'm going to be sharing with you all of the tips and tricks straight from my grandmother's lips today on The Blue Wizard Cooks. So, as always, we need to start off with the most important part of any recipe, and that is getting all of our ingredients and equipment together in one place. So this way we have everything we need, where we need it, and when we need it. Let's make some magic, kids. Perfection. Now, as I mentioned, this recipe is a little bit of a labor of love. So I've gotten a couple of things a head start for us. First thing is that back here on my stove, I have already started one large pot of water to boiling because we're gonna need that to work on the cabbage in a second. Now, the other thing that I did do ahead of time is that I cooked off my rice. What you need to do is start with 1 cup of uncooked rice and then cook it according to the package instructions. Now, the reason I did this ahead of time is that what I had in the house was brown rice, and brown rice can take anywhere from 35 to 40 minutes to cook. And I didn't want to wait that long while I'm on camera with you guys. So I did do that ahead of time, but if you're using white rice, it's gonna go a lot faster, and you probably don't need to do it ahead of time like I did. Another thing that we have to do, of course, is prep our cabbage because we're gonna be going over to the stove with this in a second. Now, the way to prep your cabbage is that you want to take out this core because the idea is that we're gonna pre-cook this cabbage and remove 1 leaf at a time. So the way that I do this is I sort of go in with just a regular steak knife at an angle, trying to remove the core. Cabbage is a little tough. It's a tougher vegetable, which is why it makes good wrap for these cabbage rolls. So you have to use a little bit of elbow grease to get the core out. But once you get going, it shouldn't be too hard. All right, so I got a big chunk of the core out, and now I just want to sort of clean it up on the inside, get as much of the core as I can. Perfect. That wasn't so bad. Just a few little extra pieces in there, and so now we have it nicely cored out. So I'm going to take our cabbage over to the stove because we're going to start cooking this as soon as the water starts to boil. But we have something else that we can get going first. Inside of this bowl, I've chopped up very finely 1 small onion, and I also have in here 2 tablespoons of butter. We're gonna cook off this onion first before we get going with the cabbage. And I'm just gonna use a small saute pan, and I'm gonna set my burner to sort of a medium heat. And I'm gonna start by melting in, again, that's 2 tablespoons of butter. Now, the way that you know that this butter is ready to go is when it starts foaming in the pan, which you can see here. And so now I'm gonna add in my 1 small onion, very small, that I have chopped very finely. All right, and we're just gonna cook that, stirring occasionally until the onion gets nice and caramelized and a nice light brown color. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes, and as you can see, our onions are starting to get a little bit lightly browned, a little bit golden on the edges, and they're starting to go translucent. Full disclosure though, I did increase the temperature to medium-high because I have the patience of a gnat. But anyway, these onions have to go and sit and cool before we can use them. So I'm just gonna set them off to the side over here on my table until it's time to mix them with the meat. In the meantime, the water for our cabbage has started to boil. So I've now moved that pot over to this other burner just so that you can get a little bit of a better view. And what I have sitting off to the side, of course, is my cabbage because we're going to be cooking this in a second, but I also have a large bowl waiting so that I can drop the finished cabbage into the bowl when I'm done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use tongs to manipulate my cabbage. My grandmother used 2 forks because she didn't have these kinds of tongs. But so you would use whatever you want. You don't have to have the fancy tongs in order to make it work. So like I said, my grandmother used 2 forks, but I'm gonna use tongs. And you want to carefully drop the cabbage into the boiling water. I say carefully because the cabbage is big and the water is very hot, so you do not want it to splash up in your face. Oh, and I forgot one thing. I forgot to add a little bit of salt to the water, so I'm gonna do that now. So now we're gonna wait for this cabbage to come to a boil again, and once it boils for about 2 minutes, I'm gonna start removing the outer leaves. So as you can see, what I've done now is while I'm waiting for the water to come back up to a boil or at least a simmer, what I've done is I've used my tongs to flip the cabbage upside down, and I'm using the tongs to sort of hold the cabbage under the water to make sure that it's getting completely dunked and cooked all around. Just makes it sink a little bit easier in there so it gets cooked. Again, guys, this is a labor of love. This part takes a little patience because the cabbage was cold and you dunked it into hot water. So it's gonna take a little bit of time for that water to come back up to a simmer again. But you wanna make sure that it's up to a little bit of a simmer before you start removing the leaves. So it's been about 5 minutes, and as you can see, I put the lid on top of the pot to get it to come to a simmer a little bit faster, which it now has. And guys, don't worry about how long the cabbage is sitting in the boiled water. It is more difficult to overcook a cabbage than it is to undercook a cabbage. So don't stress out that it's been in the water for a while. I promise you it's gonna be okay. So, and you can notice some of the leaves have actually naturally already started to fall off. So, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to get each individual leaf pulled off of the cabbage in a semi-cooked state. So I'm just gonna start pulling off the leaves as they fall off. And this part could definitely take some time, kids. It takes a little bit. You have to sort of wait a couple of minutes in between each pulling off of the leaves just to get the next set of leaves cooked all the way through. So I'm gonna be here for a minute, so we're gonna cut ahead. All right, as you can see, I'm moving the last leaf out now. Leaf. I'm moving the last leaf out now. All right, and all I'm left with is this tiny little core of little leaves that we're not gonna be able to really use for anything. So I don't know what you wanna do with it, but I'm just gonna probably put it in the trash. So anyway, now I'm just gonna set these off to the side to cool. And while we're waiting for that to happen, we're going to get started on our filling. So the gołąbki are stuffed with a meat filling, and the meats that I am using are ground pork and ground beef. Now, my grandmother, when she made gołąbki, she would also use a little bit of ground veal as well. But I have found that it is more difficult to find ground veal these days, so I'm not using it here. And if you can't find the ground pork either, you can just use all ground beef. It works out just fine. So I used 1 pound of ground beef and ½ a pound of ground pork. If you're substituting other meats, you just need 1.5 pounds of meat total. I am also going to add in the onions that we cooked earlier and that have now been cooled. So add those in. And of course, we're gonna add in our prepared, now, rice. Now I'm just gonna use clean hands, a cook's best friend, all right, to go and start combining these things together. Okay, at this point, I have my meat mixture about halfway mixed through, all right, but I wanna add a couple of things to it in order to, you know, zhuzh it up a little bit. So to our meat mixture, I'm going to add in 2 teaspoons of kosher salt and ½ teaspoon of fresh ground black pepper. And also, to help the mixture bind and stick together a little bit more, I'm going to be adding in some milk. Doesn't matter which milk you want to use. You want to use, it can go up to anywhere to 2 cups of milk, depending on the moisture of your meat and the moisture of your rice. But we're going to start with 1.5 cups of milk first. And we'll add the last ½ cup if we need it. All right, I'd say that that's actually moist enough and it's the perfect consistency where it is. It's holding together, but you can see there's still a lot of moisture in it. So we don't need the other half cup. We're gonna be good with it right there. So I'm gonna wash my hands again and then we'll start making our gołąbki, our cabbage rolls. So to start making our cabbage rolls, we need to start with our pot. What I'm going to do is actually line the bottom of this pot because this pot is going to go into the oven. Oh, which speaking of, I'm going to start my oven preheating to 350 degrees. Done. Okay, and I'm going to line the bottom of this pot with some of the extra cabbage leaves that I have. The ones that you want to look for are the ones that are super tiny, that you're not going to be able to make a gołąbki out of. So I'm just gonna line the bottom of that pan. Again, this is gonna get baked in the oven and we don't want the gołąbki to burn, so that's why we're lining the bottom of the pan with some of those extra small leaves. I'm gonna set this pan off to the side and it's gonna become the landing zone for our cabbage rolls. All right, so we're gonna go through the process now of making our cabbage rolls. So I've lined out a nice little mat over here that I can work on that you should be able to see what I'm doing. All right, and I'm gonna take our first piece of cabbage. It looks kind of like a weird shower cap, but there it is. All right, and the first thing we need to do to prep the cabbage is there's this sort of large central vein that goes through each of the leaves. And I'm just gonna cut that out. You can do a little bit more work and try to just shave off part of the stem in order to make it a little thinner, but I think this is much easier and it works just as fine. Then I'm gonna make sure that the cabbage is lined up in such a way that the cup of the cabbage is facing up, okay? And I'm gonna cross over here to make sure that we're not leaking out. Perfect. Let me do this towards the camera so that you can see a little better, okay? So then I'm just gonna take about 1/4 of the cup of the meat mixture, okay? And place it right here on the edge of our cabbage. Then I'm gonna take and fold over the sides, sort of like you would do a burrito, and roll it up. Now that I'm looking at it, I think I could have probably put a little more meat in that one, but that's okay. All right, and there you go. There's your first cabbage roll. And then you're just gonna put that into your pot. Line it down with the seam side down so that the seams aren't facing up and they're not gonna get destroyed. All right, and I'll do another one for you. So again, I'm gonna snip out this thick stem. All right. Fold that over, grab a little more than 1/4 of a cup of meat, maybe about let's say about maybe 1/2 cup for this leaf. And again, fold over the sides and start to roll up the roll. All right, and there you go. And then lay it in the pan. And I'm just gonna keep making more of these cabbage rolls until I am out of my meat mixture. So I'll see you back here in a few minutes. So before I finished up with the cabbage rolls, I wanted to show you guys a couple of things. First off, I wanted to show you that sometimes you get like really big leaves like these over here, and you could probably get away with making 2 gołąbkis out of these. But you don't have to. I mean, you want to make one per each you can. But I did want to also show you the way that my grandmother does it. So she uses a knife and she'll go and start cutting into the core from the side horizontally to shave it and make it thinner so that it's not as thick to chew on. I'm gonna take these actually and cut them in half and make 2 out of them. Now when you're doing this, you wanna try to make it so that you're gonna have enough room to actually roll the whole gołąbki. And so I'm doing it sort of like on an angle and covering them up like so, okay? To make a little cabbage roll like that. I'm just trying to get as much bang for my buck as I can. So again, just take, roll it up, tuck in the sides, and keep rolling. The idea is you don't want to have any of the meat exposed to the outside. And as I'm throwing them into my container, I just wanted to point out that it is definitely okay to stack the gołąbki. All right, you want to make sure that you're getting them all into the pan, and it's okay if you put them on top of each other. That's how they're supposed to be. All right, so here you have my pot of finished gołąbki. I did not count them to see how many there were because honestly, it's going to be different for you depending on how big your cabbage leaves are. So you're going to get a different amount every time that you make it. It's just the nature of the beast. All right. Now, before we get this covered and put into the oven, we do need to make a sauce to go with these. And let me show you how to do that next after I get this table a little bit cleaned off. Okay, much better. So the sauce that we're gonna make is a tomato-based sauce, and we're going to be using actually canned tomato sauce in order to do it. I have here 3 8-ounce cans of tomato sauce. And I'm just gonna add those in to a nice large bowl. And then I'm also going to add in 3 cans worth of water. I'm just gonna use the same cans because that'll get out some of the extra stuff that I left behind. And then I'm gonna whisk that together. I'm just gonna add a little bit of salt to taste. Probably added about half a teaspoon. Give that a whisk. Give it a taste. Actually tastes really good. All right, so, and that's it. That's the basis of the sauce. It's just that simple. And so then I'm going to take and add our sauce over our cabbage. And the sauce really should come up and pretty much cover the cabbage. If it does not, you just add a little bit more water until it does. Easy peasy, okay? But we're still not done. To the top of this pot, we are going to take some of the outer leaves of the cabbage that we have left. You see these leaves that are really super dark, bright green? All right, we are going to be using those because these are really tough and not very good to eat. So instead, we're just going to use them to protect our gołąbki while they're cooking by taking and laying them over the surface of our pot. Because again, this whole pot is going into the oven. And so these need a little bit of protection. All right, my surface is covered. I'm gonna put the lid on, and now I'm gonna bring it over to the stove again. Now, right before I actually go and put this into the oven to bake at our 350 degrees, I want to take and give it a little bit of a head start. So I'm gonna set that on a high burner and let it come to a boil while I clean everything up over here. And then by the time that I've cleaned up, then it'll be ready to place into the oven. All right, kids, my gołąbki just started boiling, so I'm gonna take it off the heat and place it into our 350 degree oven where it will cook for the next 1.5 hours. Told you kids, this is a bit of a process. It takes a little bit of time, but I promise you it's gonna be worth it. See you back here in 1.5 hours. Now, while those gołąbki are cooking away, I just wanted to take this time to remind you that if you liked this video, you could really help me out by hitting that like button down below. It helps my channel to grow, and it lets me know that you want to see more recipes just like this one. Another thing that you can do to help my channel to grow is to make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. Also, don't forget to hit the little bell for notifications so you'd be notified every time that I post a new video. And of course, while you're at it, why not share this video with a friend through social media so that the word about my channel can get out there. If you want to make this recipe or any of the other recipes that I've shared on this YouTube channel, plus a few extra, you definitely want to make sure to go and check out my website, bluewizardfood.com. You can either type that into your address bar or just hit the link in the description below this video. And of course, kids, if you want to keep up with me on my other cooking exploits when I am not making YouTube videos, you're definitely going to want to find me on social media on either Facebook or Instagram at JoeTheBlueWiz. Well, the timer on my gołąbki is about to go off, so let's go and check it out. When the gołąbki come out of the oven, you're going to want to take off the cover and then remove the extra leaves that you set on top of the gołąbki while they were baking. And there you have it, kids, my grandmother Zofia's recipe for gołąbki. Now, in my family, we always serve gołąbki with boiled potatoes. And so that's what I have in this bowl over here. I just took a bunch of whole potatoes, peeled them, and boiled them in a little bit of salted water. But you can serve with rice or just eat it plain, just the way that that it comes out of the oven. Now, in my family, you could debate the proper way to eat a gołąbki. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, whether it's you can leave it whole or mash it up or whatever. But for the sake of not giving you an entire dissertation on how to properly eat this one dish, I'm just gonna go straight in with a knife and a fork. So I'm just gonna go and give myself a little slice through the cabbage. Everything's beautifully cooked. Want to get a little extra of the sauce. Here we go. Guys, it is so good. There is no more comforting dish to me and the members of my family than this dish. This is one that my grandmother is sort of most known for making. She made it a lot, and when I just got that bite just now, it sort of like brought all the comforts of being in her kitchen. It's just like flooding back to me. So I definitely recommend that you guys try out this recipe. Again, it's a little bit more work and it takes a little bit of time, but I promise you that it is 100% worth it. Well, kids, that's all that I have time for here today on The Blue Wizard Cooks. Remember that you don't have to be a professional chef or even a wizard in order to make magic in your kitchen. Bye now.